Another feature that you show off on the homepage, and I've had various challenges with, is just helping smooth out animation. Can you talk about like how y'all approach animation, and maybe even for people who aren't aware, like what some platform specific issues you might have when you're trying to
Yeah.
build something like this?
Yeah, the animations has been a whole journey. It's one of those things, like I said, like I alluded to that last UI kit. One of the reasons I think it failed was that I built it one way and then later on I needed to add features and then you realize that those features just don't fit, right? And I was worried about that with Tamagui. I was thinking about launching it. I had it mostly working for what I wanted, the design system, the style library and everything. And at the time I didn't have any like animations at all. And I had a choice, like, do I do no animations in the first version? Do I do maybe one type of animation? Like just the obvious choice would just be the React Native animated driver because it's built into React Native and it works on web and native. Um, but then of course there's this animation library for React Native that's very popular called Reanimated. It's very clean and much nicer API. It's definitely more popular with like maybe like people who are just into that React Native world. They love to use that because it's very fast and very cool, and much cleaner APIs, right? So there was always that looming, and then there's also obviously CSS on the web, just the built-in platform stuff, which could also save a lot of bundle size potentially because the React Native animated JavaScript is like 30 kilobytes, like minified and gzipped or whatever. Like it's a lot to add in for just a website. And so I was at this crossroads, like, do I just ignore it or not? And it just kind of worried me because like I could tell thinking about it with like the compiler, it's like, well, how do you even do that? And so I decided to bite that bullet and I decided to go all the way. It's like classic kind of developer syndrome of just like, well, I've got to try, I've got to do it. So I did end up implementing them. They didn't work well for like a lot of the life of Tamagui. Like, I think there was always like some bug in one or the other, and it's been a long journey, I think, to get them mostly working. And actually, as of like just the last few months, I think they've really come into their own. Actually, what's cool is the website was running on the React Native animated driver because that was kind of the best supported one. And I've been working with a little bit with Fernando Rojo, who built a bunch of cool libraries in the React world, and he wrote this thing called Moti, which is kind of like it kind of abstracted Reanimated for native and web into a nicer API. And he also he exported this hook called use Moti, basically that kind of like does all the low level stuff for me. So we rebuilt the Reanimated driver using that and got it to be 100% passing on all the different like things that we needed. And I swapped it out in the website, which is pretty cool. Like we literally swapped the entire animation system on the website, and I don't think you can really tell. Like it basically like you wouldn't know, I guess, unless you knew that we changed that out, which was really awesome. But yeah, I mean, the problems have been there's a lot to it. I mean, there's a lot of like careful logic in the style system. For example, like I said, like we need to track if they're accessing values in the theme that are raw values versus CSS. And so our use theme hook that powers the internal way that we access themes, and the way that people who use Tamagui can access themes. You can use theme hook, or it does like tracking of what properties you access, but not just the properties, but whether or not you called to turn them into a CSS variable or into a raw value at the end. And if you do track them into a raw value, it basically keeps track of. It's a little bit like almost like a state system that you would see, like an observable type state system where each component is tracking whether or not you're accessing any of these dynamic values. And then if so, it has to listen to the theme changes and re-render when it gets a new theme change. Whereas if it's a CSS driver, it sees that you're just turning it into a CSS variable. It doesn't track the theme changes. And so you save, like, because the website's like this pathological case where you have a huge page of components, like way more than you would maybe in like a typical mobile app on one page. And so it's very sensitive. Like if I ever de-opt that, when you switch from light to dark mode, for example, which is like, re-render the whole page in a typical React Native type setup. I mean, that's like really the flex, I think, of Tamagui is like the fact that homepage of the website, you can switch between light and dark mode and it doesn't really use much work because the only thing it's rendering is some of the animated components and changing out their like theme values. But other than that, it basically doesn't have to re-render anything because it's tracking, So that like the intersection of theming, theme changing, animations, and the compiler are like where things have got, like that's where we've spent, a pretty crazy amount of time trying to get them all working. But yeah, I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, there's so much detail to animations, but I definitely want to like, I think now we're at a cool part too, because we could keep expanding. Like there's this animate presence library that we took from Framer Motion, and just kind of adapted that, and it's so cool. Like it lets you do these really nice animations very declaratively, and I think there's like many like further upgrades, like like the multi-step, I guess multi-stage animations that we don't support, but we could get that working across the different drivers. That would be pretty cool. And yeah, just like kind of like it's cool now that it finally works basically fully, because I think now we are well set up to kind of like keep going and maybe get more, like, because CSS is very powerful with animations, and we haven't really gotten to that level. We just have the most basic stuff. So yeah.